Three of America's most senior black politicians will introduce legislation in both houses of Congress today, proposing sweeping reforms to policing in response to the death of George Floyd. The bill, which would ban chokeholds, create a national registry of officers with a record of bad conduct and weaken the burden of proof needed to charge officers with use of excessive force, was drafted by Democrats. It falls far short of the most radical demand emerging from the streets, to strip funding from police departments or abolish them entirely and reallocate the estimated $100 billion spent annually towards social programs and funding for schools, hospitals and housing in marginalized communities. The killing of Mr. Floyd, 46, a black man who died in Minneapolis 2 weeks ago after a white police officer knelt on his neck for almost 9 minutes, has reconfigured political debate 5 months before a presidential election seen by both sides as a watershed moment in American history. Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, has expressed support for the protests, knelt publicly in solidarity with demonstrators and committed himself to national police reforms to end the culture and policies that protect bad cops and keep them from being held accountable for their actions. President Trump has cast himself as a guarantor of internal stability and threatened to send in military units. Sleepy Joe Biden and the radical left Democrats want to defund the police, he wrote on Twitter yesterday. I want great and well-paid law enforcement. I want law and order. 80% of Americans feel that the country is drifting out of control, according to a poll by the Wall Street Journal and NBC News. Twice as many people are troubled by the actions of the police who killed Mr. Floyd than are worried by the violence at some protests. On Saturday, the mayor of Minneapolis, a white civil rights lawyer elected on a platform of improving community relations with the police, was harangued by a crowd when he attended a protest and refused to commit on the spot to defunding. Told by a woman on stage that it was a yes or no question whether he was prepared to defund the Minneapolis Police Department, Jacob Frey, 38, replied quietly, I do not support the full abolition of the police. A sea of protesters chanted, "Go home, Jacob, go home." And shame. Shame. As he retreated from the stage. Yesterday, members of Minneapolis City Council announced that they intended to disband the police force. In Washington last week, Muriel Bowser, the mayor, commissioned artists to paint Black Lives Matter in huge yellow letters on a road leading to the White House. The movement called the artwork bearing its name a distraction from real policy changes. Civic leaders have already promised some concessions. Jeremiah Ellison, a city council member in Minneapolis, tweeted, "We are going to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department. And when we're done, we're not simply going to glue it back together. We are going to dramatically rethink how we approach public safety and emergency response." Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, promised to cut up to $150 million from the Los Angeles Police Department's $1.86 billion budget and divert it to non-white communities. The police reform bill is sponsored by Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, senators who both ran for the presidential nomination, and in the House of Representatives by Karen Bass, chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Jerry Nadler, chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The law would be the most expansive intervention into policing by Congress in decades. Ms. Harris is a frontrunner to become Mr. Biden's vice presidential nominee. Her support for police reform could help to neutralize previously raised objections from criminal justice campaigners over her record as a former California Attorney General. William Barr, the Attorney General, said that he did not believe that the law enforcement system is systematically racist, but that Americans had to recognize that for most of our history, our institutions were explicitly racist. Mr. Trump said yesterday that he had ordered the National Guard to withdraw from Washington. About 5,000 had been present, but CBS and CNN claimed that he had asked for 10,000 to be deployed, then was talked out of it by Mr. Barr, among others. China's state media has seized on the unrest in the U.S. to score propaganda points. Hu Zijin, the editor-in-chief of the Global Times, tweeted, "The U.S. repression of domestic unrest has further eroded the moral basis to claim itself a beacon of democracy." Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, hit back at Beijing's obscene propaganda. During the best of times, the PRC ruthlessly imposes communism. Amid the most difficult challenges, the United States secures freedom, he said.